Okay, I think people will continue to filter in, and that's great. Welcome. This is the Natural Start Alliance Forum on the Flourishing in Nature research briefs that have been developed by Dr. Julie Ernst. My name is Christy Merrick. I direct the Natural Start Alliance, and I just, as always, want to thank you for being here, but especially I wanted to thank you for being here this week. I know it's a super tough time for everybody, particularly in the United States. We have an undecided election that's on all of our minds. Our COVID cases are surging across the US and really across the world. And I know from talking with a lot of you that that's something that's really affecting your programs and your families and your friends. And it's a tough time. I don't know if anybody else is joining from South Florida. We're watching a tropical storm approaching, and certainly sending our really good thoughts to all the people in Central America who were hit with a very major hurricane. So it is obviously a tough time, but to me, it really highlights that our work is more important than ever. I think it's never been more important to offer children a really safe and healthy place to play and learn. And it just feels to me more important than ever that we continue to make the case for what we do so that more children have this opportunity. And there's certainly nothing more important for us in making the case for what we do than having really solid research to back up what we do and why it's important. And that's the purpose of our forum today. So just quickly how it will work, I'll just give you a little bit of background from some other research that we've been working on at NAAA and Natural Start, just to kind of let you know what we've been working on. The bulk of the time will be with Dr. Julie Ernst. And then after she has some time to share about what she's doing, we'll just have a full group Q&A today. Sometimes we do small groups. Today we'll just be together in a full group. So feel free to use that chat to ask any questions, make any comments, share any resources that you have that you'd like to share. And we can share all of this out after the forum. So I mentioned, just wanted to give you a quick little bit of background around research at NAAA and Natural Start. I think that we have found at NAAA that historically we've had a little bit of a tendency to rely on really compelling stories to talk about the value of what we do. It's that feeling of like, well, if you spent a day out with the kids, you would see, or, I could tell you the story of this child who was really transformed. And those are really important stories. It's very valuable to have those direct experiences. But when we think about shifting policy, when we think about raising funds, really making the case, trying to get our institutions to start or expand programs for young children, we find it's really important to have some solid research to back up our claims. So that is something that we've been working on broadly at NAAA for years now through the EE Works project, moving from what we call anecdotes to evidence and really trying to use the power of research to demonstrate the impact and value of environmental education broadly. So I have just a short video about the project, just if you're not aware of it, just to kind of fill you in.
NAAA is linking powerful stories of innovation and success from around the world with evidence for how environmental education helps build community, create meaningful change, and shape a more sustainable future. EE Works is a research and communication effort we've launched with Stanford University and a number of great partners. We will be exploring a series of themes, including the impact of EE on students, conservation outcomes, and civic engagement. The initial analysis is a comprehensive review of academic literature looking at the impact of EE on K-12 students. This research review proves what many of us have long felt. Environmental education has led to a number of positive impacts for students, from improving academic performance and enhancing critical thinking skills, to developing personal growth, confidence, autonomy, and leadership. Armed with the tools from EE Works, we can state with confidence that these benefits are found not just in a handful of classrooms or for certain programs, but significantly and robustly across the literature. We can say that environmental education works.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, okay. you can put it in the chat if you're having a problem, and we can try to help you.
Visit EE Pro to find out more about EE Works and join the discussion in the Research and Evaluation group. And EE Works is just one initiative of NAAE. We're reaching millions with environmental education, leading to a sustainable future for all.
Okay, so the EE Works project has been looking at the research in environmental education on the impacts and value in a number of different areas over the last, I don't know, probably 5 to 10 years. And they are working on now a brief that will be specific to early childhood environmental education. So just wanted to let you know that's in the works. I'm sure we'll probably have another forum or some kind of way to inform you about that when that is released. But actually the research piece of that has been published. So Emily, maybe you can share that in the chat, fill people in about the research piece, but NAAE will be working on the communications piece of it to complement what they found in the research. So just want to make you aware that that's coming. And then just a couple of other tools that I just wanted you to know about. NAAE has collaborated with the Children in Nature Network to develop this EE research library. It's a completely searchable library. It puts so much research at your fingertips. I just really think it's a fantastic resource if you're looking for research. So I wanted to make you aware of that. It's through NAAE. We also published the International Journal of Early Childhood Environmental Education. Julie has certainly published articles there, and it's a freely open, accessible education journal, peer-reviewed, that I encourage you to take a look at if you're interested in finding out about research about this. Also, I encourage you, if you're thinking about publishing, they certainly accept submissions from practitioners. So we really want everybody to be part of the conversation around research in this space. And then lastly, the conference is a place where we always try to highlight research in early childhood environmental education and nature-based learning. We really want to make it a place where researchers can come together to collaborate and where practitioners can keep up to date on the latest research. So I encourage you to look for research there also. So with that, I want to hand it over to Julie. Dr. Julie Ernst is someone we have worked with at Natural Start from the beginning. She's been such a leader in this field. She got her PhD at the University of Florida with an emphasis in environmental education, research, and evaluation. Before that, she worked with the Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service. So she's had a really rich career, very deep knowledge of environmental education broadly, and lately has been really looking specifically at early childhood and nature preschools in particular. So thank you so much, Julie. We're really excited to hear about what you've been working on, and I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing so you can take over.
All right, I'm hoping my screen is shared. Can you see it? Okay. Well, good morning, and I wanna thank the Natural Start Alliance for hosting this and for doing what you're doing to kind of keep momentum and to bring all of us together. And just a warm hello to all of you. And I've noticed quite a few names of really leaders and founders and fellow researchers in the field, as well as many wonderful practitioners. So whatever your role and connection is, I just want to echo what has been said already about just the important work that you are all doing, and that's, I think, even more relevant and needed in the times that we're in. So with that, oops. Gotta get my slides moving, catch them up here, excuse me. Oops. So I just thought I'd spend just a moment kind of backing up and explaining the context or sort of what led me to focus on this direction. And for a number of years, I've been researching more broadly K-12 and conservation ed. And I have a course at UMD at the University of Minnesota-Duluth where I teach, and it's Young Children, Nature, and Sustainability. And within that course, we visit a number of our nature preschools and use those as study sites. And I remember the first time stepping into one of our partnering sites, the Windbridge Schoolhouse in Duluth, and it really struck me the phrasing that she had above her door that children and parents see each time they exit the kind of base, the schoolhouse. And you can probably see from the photo, but the words brave, kind, hardy, and free. And I remember really just pausing and being very moved by that. And in some ways, just almost shaken in the sense of like, oh my goodness, what do I want for my own children? What do I want for children in this world? And those words are really powerful to me toward kind of like pausing and stepping back and thinking about the questions of, what kind of people do we want our children to grow up to become, and what kind of world do we want to live in? And so the second piece that kind of rerouted my research line to some degree is just seeing the really restorative effects of nature on my own children. And was mentioned already, these compelling stories, which, sometimes are really important inspirations, motivations to kind of ground the work that we do. And for me, that was the case. My girls are both in competitive dance, and as much as I know like the importance of unstructured play, it's sometimes so hard to fit that in the midst of norms that would lead you to believe otherwise. And I remember one afternoon after school, and it was kind of time to get ready to leave for dance, and my younger daughter was out in the mud kitchen and in her play fort, and she was so busy, and I was saying, oh, it's time to leave for dance, and she was just kind of ignoring me. And then at one point I heard her, as she was almost exhaling, almost like an utterance under her breath that was barely audible, but I heard her say, "This is so satisfying." And it just really struck me, because I thought, I've never heard her say that in any of the other activities, school, outside of, that was the only time I've heard her say something about this is so satisfying to the way that we spend time. And so that too was a very moving moment for me in terms of thinking about the importance of time in nature and nature play. And so from there, it kind of rerouted my broader focus of studying environmental education to focusing in on early childhood and the role of nature play, nature preschools. And really the question of why almost seems like, why would we have to ask that? Or why would we need research to back what we're doing? It feels like so instinctual, something that has been known across time and across cultures. I imagine all of us have adults, whether it's parents or grandparents, other relatives who we can probably recall, sending us out to play. And if we had asked them why, I'm guessing they may have said, because fresh air is good for us, or it's good for you. And it just seems like such an obvious thing. And it reminds me of a quote that was in one of my favorite books relating to early childhood and nature play. And the author quotes a Swedish psychiatrist and researcher who did a study asking how important nature is to citizens of Sweden. And, a very high percentage, of course, agreed, very important. But then the researcher went on to ask, well, why? And when they were forced to kind of articulate why, it was like, why would you want to have children? Why would you want to be outside? It was so obvious that they had really never given it a second thought. And so, it's kind of interesting to think about pulling together a body of evidence to support something that does seem so obvious and so instinctual, for which maybe we shouldn't need to give a second thought to. But the reality is we are in kind of a culture and a time where it's not necessarily the normative environment for children, the normative routine. To some degree, I would say we have an absence of cultural norms that support that, and policies that make it very difficult in some cases. And so that's where I think the research comes in to help ground the work that we're doing. And so I think in many cases, we could say we probably have enough evidence to proceed in this direction of nature preschools and the role of unstructured play in early childhood. But with that said, I think it can't hurt to have more research that can help answer to critics or to, justify what we're doing to stakeholders. And also, I think it's really critical to help advocate for moving these pockets of really wonderful programs into more routine use and into the mainstream. And so out of that is the line of studies that I've been working on for a number of years, that I've used the phrasing flourishing in nature. And I've thought about that in the context of what we want for children. We want them not to just get by, not to just survive, not to make it, which is, I kind of feel like what we're trying to do right now. But we want them to thrive. We want them to flourish, to grow and develop in healthy and vigorous ways. Oftentimes in the kind of result of having a particularly favorable environment, which is what I think major preschools are. But even in times that aren't so favorable and in places that aren't so favorable, helping children to flourish. And again, I am so appreciative of the work of all of you who work directly with children and families, because that is such a important piece toward helping children flourish. And I think it's obvious what it looks like what does flourishing mean in the context of children. But I think so often we see and experience the opposite, or something that's other than flourishing, and so prevalent, I think, in what we are facing today, where we, I think a great concern is that children are probably not flourishing, or maybe some are, but I think there's a great bulk that are not. And I like to, I pay attention to what's going on in kind of this current schooling environment, and particularly for preschool and kindergarten children. And I so often am seeing posts of parents saying, this has been so difficult for my kindergartners or my preschoolers. Does anyone know of any alternatives? And, you see in these pictures just children that are, not doing so well, I think is fair to say. And I also think it's interesting to see the comments that go along with it. And it's so sad to see some of these pictures, but then a comment like, well, that's actually what oftentimes it looks like. Parents just aren't always seeing that in the classroom. Hope that's not the case. I think maybe it could be the case in some places, but again, it really, to me, underscores just the wonderful work and important work that's happening in our nature preschools. And then, like I said, not only in, normal times, but, in this era of, the pandemic that we're in, not very favorable environment. And how do we support children in flourishing in spite of this? Picture spoke to me. It's a children's section of a public library, and normally it's just full of all sorts of enriching and fun play areas and such, and those of course are all blocked off with the regulations, yet we have children that are still finding ways to engage with stories, and whether that's flourishing, I'm not really sure, but those are the times that we're in. When we think of the word flourishing, it is in some ways very much conducive to the phrasing of well-being and well-becoming, which speaks to both short-term and also helping children as they move into the future, this idea of well-becoming who they are in a holistic, authentic, and meaningful, that they're going on to live meaningful lives. And we're not just thinking about what do they need for kindergarten or what is going to serve them well, so they're ready in third grade to kind of switch gears and to other academic deeper things. And it really struck me, again, as I mentioned, kind of in my own experiences when I was looking for preschool for my older daughter. And unfortunately, it was the time that kind of predated the growth of nature preschools we have in our area. And I remember just being very disheartened as I visited a number of preschools trying to find one for her. And the number of preschools that kind of touted really a focus on academics, and, we practice test taking on Fridays. And so by the time they're in kindergarten, they're really used to, the tests. And I just was like, just really struck me in not a very good way. I don't think she needs practice taking tests. I was kind of looking for something where she'd get some socializing and happy and come home, excited from her play experiences. And so, the idea of thinking about what's going to serve them well in the immediate future, but also long-term and over life. And so in this line of research, what I've been trying to do is study the impact of nature preschools and the role of unstructured nature play within nature preschools, but coming at it from sort of an intersection between what do we need to have a more just and sustainable future, and at the same time, how can we contribute to the well-being, the well-becoming, early learning and development, and those kinds of outcomes. And so I've been looking for things that kind of fall in between the two or have that overlap that can help address and respond to stakeholders across all sorts of different related sectors within these circles. And so over the course of this research line, I've been looking at outcomes that would fall in a variety of developmental and learning domains. And some of these are completed, others of these are in progress, and trying to kind of piece together in some ways a puzzle or an underlying foundation that can help demonstrate the benefits of having children learn through nature preschool, and that it's not just going to help them be ready for kindergarten, but again, in that well-being, well-becoming, it can help them move into life with, well-rounded development and not just focusing in on, for example, the cognitive domain. And so in this line of research, I've had the absolute blessing to work with a growing collaborative, locally, the Nature Play Collaborative here in Duluth. And we have just wonderful partnering sites that have been so enthusiastic to participate and so generous in opening up their sites for not only college students and pre-service teacher prep kinds of things, but also for being very engaged research partners. And, in prior studies of before I switched into this line, it was always a struggle to get participation and to try and get sufficient, participation by whether it's parents or children. And in these studies within this Flourishing in Nature research line, I've just been so, like I said, blessed because participation of invited, parents or children, teachers, whatever it might be, has you just almost every time been almost 100%, which I've just never experienced as a researcher. So I can tell that I think it speaks to the need for it and just the wonderful cooperation of these partnering sites. And so I'm just going to highlight 4, 5, 6, I can't remember exactly, studies that are completed, and these have been translated into the research briefs, the tools for sharing the results of these studies that I'll mention at the end, but that was kind of the focus of the forum for today. I'm just going to highlight a few and then kind of tell you what's on the horizon and then show you the briefs. One of the studies that has been so fun for me to work with in terms of data collection, but to really think about it, is the study that focused on curiosity. And curiosity is certainly a relevant construct across learning, across scientific thinking, across contributing in all sorts of different sustainability contexts, but also has a connection with acquiring knowledge, seeking behavior, which relates again to kind of academic related pieces that are going to be important in the school context as well. And so it's a very important force behind learning, and it has a role in things like inquiry, helping see interconnectedness around, and the things that are around them. And so the way that we studied this was through an instrument that comes out of psychology, and it's called a curiosity drawer box, which in essence looks like just kind of like a common little plastic box. If you can picture that with all sorts of little drawers, sometimes people use it for organizing like things in the garage or something like that. But in each drawer was a different novel little toy that was available for children to play with. And so as the researcher, you would present the drawer box to the children and just invite them to play with it. And they had up until, I believe it was 10 minutes to use and explore with the curiosity drawer box. And then the researcher would record what the children did. And so this research approach was looking at kind of 3 areas: preference for novel stimuli, indicated by how many toys they took out; the desire to know, which was indicated by the number of toys that they would kind of examine and look at. And then the third aspect, and I would argue the most important aspect, was to what extent or how many toys they were actually engaging with, playing with, using, attempting to solve if it was like a little puzzle. And that really is reflective of the refinement of perception that occurs as they engage with whatever that little toy was. And with kind of the arrows are signaling that there is increasing initiative toward sense making. And so I think that highlights too the importance of that latter one in these three areas. And so in the study that we did, there were 4 nature preschools and 2 preschools that were non-nature, and we used them more as the baseline. The areas where there were significant differences were in the first and the third. So the preference for novel stimuli, the nature preschool children had a higher score. And then the one that, again, I think is probably, strongest in terms of meaningfulness and importance would be that last one, that the children in the nature preschools were engaging with more toys, and the amount of time in that kind of category was significantly different than those in the non-nature preschool. So that was the curiosity one. I'm just kind of giving you a highlight of a few of these. Another study that I'll highlight is creative thinking. And I saw, I think in the names of participants in the forum today, the graduate student that worked on the study. And if I had known she was going to join, I would have had her jump in and explain it, because I think she'd do it better than I would. But Mandy, thank you for being here, and thank you for your work on the study. But that study focused on creative thinking, and creative thinking involves the process of developing novel and useful ideas. It's multidimensional, and depending on the theorist or the author, there's sometimes more sub-constructs than what I've got listed here, again, depending on the theory. But we were working from a version of creative thinking that is broken down into fluency, originality, and imagination. And again, a very important outcome in that it's relating to being able to innovate, being able to be flexible and recognize different perspectives, being able to envision solutions, being able to develop and refine and communicate and execute ideas. And again, to kind of illustrate the importance of this, yesterday we had a call with a National Science Foundation project officer who was talking about I forget now exactly the phrasings, but in essence, it's like, what are the innovations that we need to have the STEM workforce of tomorrow? Like, how do we get the future workforce? And I was just curious, like, are they interested in things that are, the antecedents, like creative thinking? And pleased to hear that they seem very enthusiastic about that. So again, I think the work that nature preschools are doing that are helping children become creative thinking are, again, contributing in all sorts of sustainability and important science contributions as well. So the way that the study proceeded for the creative thinking focus was that we used an instrument that existing published instrument, the Torrance test of creative movement, and it measures the fluency, originality, imagination, and it has different tasks where children, for example, are given like a cup, and then they're told like, how many different ways could you use this cup, or what could you do with this cup? And then they just get to start showing you or listing off things that they would do. And Mandy and I were both administering this instrument, and I imagine she would say similar, but I was just it was so marked, the difference across children in terms of the fluency of ideas or the imagination, like, that cup task. There'd be some children that would, you drink out of a cup, and then we'd say, well, anything else that you can think of? You could drink juice out of the cup, you could drink milk out of the cup, and it was like, it was a cup, and we could think of different ideas for what you could drink out of it, but it was a cup. And then some of these like nature preschool kids were coming up with just idea after it. And in this time, I don't believe this test had a time frame. And so like ideas to no end of ideas of all the different ways they could use the cup. And again, it was one of those times as a researcher, we're like, okay, I think the instrument is capturing what it's aiming to capture. But I'm going to highlight the fluency results here because this is where there was the most marked difference between the nature preschools and the non-nature preschoolers. And in terms of fluency, which is again the ability to generate ideas, the nature preschool children had a significant growth, whereas the control preschools did not. was kind of fun because I found a study that used similar ages, the same instrument, and it was an arts-based it was an arts-based or fine arts-based preschool program. And it was interesting to me to see that the nature preschool children in the study at hand had significant growth, more so than the conventional, but even scoring higher than the fine arts-based preschool, which again, I think is kind of exciting. So another study that we worked on was executive function skills, and that is becoming a really, prominent construct right now within a lot of different circles within early childhood, within education, and even more broadly. And these are the neurocognitive attention regulation skills that are really important in goal-directed behavior. And so not only are they really important in school readiness, but also for long-term academic success. And there's also even a lot of other related research that talks about how important they are in terms of behaviors after school as an adult out in society, that being able to regulate, being able to have goal-directed behavior and such, the inhibitory control, all three of these sub-constructs are really important, not only academically, but certainly more broadly than that. In children, these three are hard to separate, and so the instrument measures these in a connected way, as opposed to later in life. These are not as interwoven, and you might be stronger in one than in others, for example. And so the instrument that we used in this particular study was the Minnesota Executive Function Scale, and it's an instrument that grew out of what perhaps you might be familiar with was a card sort, and then it got converted into an iPad application. And these are researchers that are at the Twin Cities campus of the University of Minnesota within their I forget the name of their center, so I'm sorry for that. But anyways, it's leading researchers within executive function skills. But it was an iPad app that took just a couple of minutes to administer for children. And it started based on age, and then it was sensitive to the level of performance, and it kept adjusting to ultimately yield a single executive function score. And then in this study, as well as the other studies, these were pre and post tests across the preschool year. I forgot to mention that probably, but that's important information, I think. So anyways, the iPad app would ask things like, now we're going to sort by color. Can you put the pig into the box by color? That wasn't quite phrased correct. There was narrative prompts on the screen, so the researcher would say it properly. That wasn't properly what I said, but in essence, it was testing, like, could kids follow the sorting rule? So if it was asking by color, would they be able to put the green pig in the green rabbit box, as opposed to in their minds being maybe stuck on the pig goes in the pig? So it's having them switch these different thinking rules. In this particular study, what we found was that the nature preschool children didn't outperform the non-nature preschool, but both sets of preschools were performing at a significantly higher level than what would be expected by just age-related normative growth, like just simply through development of the children, which I think speaks to the importance of preschool and quality preschool. The non-nature preschools and the set of studies were well-established, high-quality, play-based preschools. And so, again, I think it speaks to the importance of the high-quality preschool programming. And while nature preschools didn't do better, at least they held their own, which, again, when so many times the concern is, will my child be ready for kindergarten, to be able to say, yes, they'll have these executive function skills that are important for school readiness, but at the same time, they're also getting fresh air and physical benefits and developing in all sorts of other important holistic ways. Resilience was another focus that I feel very strongly about, and we're working on a study right now in Prior Lake Savage School District in Minnesota. David Sobel, and through the generous support of the Storer Foundation, is allowing the study of resilience to kind of build on this pilot study that we did in Duluth. Resilience, I think, is so timely I think it's so important always, but especially in the times that we're in, trying to think about resilience and how do we foster children so that when they face adversity, that they will be able to continue to grow and thrive, and even in some cases be transformed by it in a good way. So resilience is the capacity to face, overcome, and hopefully be strengthened by different challenges and adversities that we face in life. It's also integral to academic success because of the role and persistence in goal setting, and it has many other established links to things that surpass and extend well beyond the school-aged years in terms of relationships, the decreased risk for depression, healthier lives, and so on. And so the way that this was studied was through an instrument that comes out of a center, the Devereaux Early Childhood Center, which does really wonderful work in trying to support resilience in children. And they have an instrument that's designed particularly for preschool. And it's like not a self-report, but it's a reporting form that both teachers and parents fill out, a set of items that are actually measuring protective factors that can be drawn upon in the face of adversity. So do children have these that then they can go back and draw from when they encounter adversity? And so there's teacher ratings as well as parent ratings at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And as I mentioned too, it's the initiative, self-regulation, and attachment. And so in this particular study, I'm not exactly sure what that line means, the slope, but it looks like a snow slope or snow hill. I'm not sure how that got on there. But in the nature preschool students, we saw significant growth across initiative, self-regulation, and attachment. And in the non-nature preschools, there was also significant growth in the initiative. And so again, I think that speaks to the importance of good quality preschool experiences, but that the nature preschool also was contributing something within the self-regulation and attachment domains. And then we also saw a transferring effect in the nature preschool children, that they were displaying these protective factors at home as well as at school, which was something that we didn't see within the non-nature preschools. And then finally, I'll just mention the peer play and learning behaviors study. This is a study that we linked these two because they're showing to have a relationship and kind of go along together. But peer play is part of the social and emotional learning suite. It's an indicator of children's social competence and is related also to their ability to engage in more cognitively demanding tasks. And then learning behaviors are a set of dispositions and behaviors that really focus on how children approach and engage in learning situations. And this has an important connection to their ability to transition into kindergarten, for example, or transition across kind of grade level chunks, but then also their academic performance. And as I mentioned, there's a relationship between the two of them. So we studied both at the same time. And the instruments that we used were the interactive peer play scale and then the preschool learning behaviors scale. And here too, we had exciting results. And again, I'm not sure if you're seeing that blue line through there, like a strike through. I'm not really sure what that is, but I'll just have it there for the meantime. But in terms of play interactions, that's a positive trait. And so in the nature preschools relative to the non-nature, we saw significant growth. And then play disruption and play disconnection are behaviors that you would like to see not there, or a decrease is a good thing. And so significant decreases in those traits as well within the nature preschool. And then in the area of the learning behaviors, again, we saw significant growth in the three dimensions that particular instrument measures: the competence, motivation, attention, persistence, and attitudes towards learning. And so all of these research studies that I just mentioned were published and appear in journals, which again aren't a very friendly way to sometimes share with, whether it's a parent who has questions or an administrator or a community member who's wondering why we have nature preschools. And so through the wonderful skills and talents of a graduate student who is now no longer with us and on to great things, Ashlyn Tether, she was able to translate the academic versions of these into what we hope are practitioner-friendly briefs that are short, that are concise, that highlight, why we studied it, what that particular outcome is, why it's relevant, and then like a little snapshot of the results and a brief little conclusion and the reference to the actual study. And so we're hoping to, with each of these studies within this ongoing research line, not just have the results go into the academic literature, but communicate it in a way that hopefully is helpful for practitioners who might be trying to answer to stakeholders or justify the work that they're doing. In terms of future directions, we have a study underway, and I think I saw Leah on the list of names, Leah from the Lake Superior Zoo Preschool. It's a brand new preschool, and this year we're studying empathy with humans, empathy with animals. And again, here's another construct that I keep thinking, as something that the world needs is children who are growing up with the ability to show empathy, even in the context of social justice kinds of circles, discussions, the importance of that. I think empathy is just going to be a very important contribution. And then also in conservation behavior and environmental sustainability context, empathy is also very relevant to that. And so we're working on studying the growth of empathy in children in Leah's new preschool. This is something that I feel like I see this, but now having the evidence to support it. In fact, when our students in the class that I mentioned, pre-service class, are out at these nature preschools, and then as they're coming back and sharing their observations, it is so apparent to them that these children have such a sense of caring for each other that they haven't seen before. And I would agree with that they seem to like notice who's not there, or they notice when someone needs something, or they're just very kind and very compassionate. And I think some of that happens through the wonderful role modeling of the wonderful teachers. But I think there's something else that's happening within the whole set of practices that go along with the nature preschool that are really, to me, there's just so wonderful and so inspiring to see that empathy that seems to be just emerging out of these programs. So really looking forward to having some research data to kind of work with and to see if that what we're seeing is measurable and backed up by the study. And then the other kind of bigger piece to be that I am thinking about is that at some point this breadth approach of like, is it increasing empathy and kind of finding all these different constructs is the breadth that's needed. But I also think that we need some additional depth into some of these studies that are really trying to help figure out why and how can we support this and for whom. Like, is this working across all children, or are there groups that are impacted differently? And then I also think certainly the longitudinal studies are important, and more rigorous studies where larger samples, more diverse samples and such. And that's where, I've been pretty excited about the partnership with the Prior Lake Circle of Friends preschool. They have about 10 sections of preschools within their district that are all drawing from a kind of a similar geographic area, but have a range of socioeconomic statuses and a broader racial and ethnic diversity than what we have in our region. And so it provides like kind of an ideal scenario to begin to study some of these in more rigorous ways, and really are thankful for that partnership that's underway. And so with that, I just want to acknowledge the participating nature preschools. I'll have wonderful presences on social media and on the web that you can check out. I also want to thank their generous permission for letting me use photos, and I kind of ran short of time, and so I didn't get all the photo credits, but just to share that those photos were coming from our wonderful partnering sites. I want to mention the whole team of graduate students that have been working on this, one undergraduate student and primarily master's students, and then one doctoral student that was visiting from Turkey. And so I appreciate all of their on the ground work and thought and effort. And then, I absolutely want to acknowledge and really thank the practitioners, children and family for their participation in the studies, but really for just the meaningful work and contributions that they are making. And just to kind of leave us in that kind of recognition of our practitioners and just that reminder that you are making such an important difference. And I think today more than ever when things are really tough, I think for many families and for children. And so really appreciate that you are continuing to invest in making the difference that you are. I think that is all I have. So should I stop sharing, Christy?
Sorry. Sure, that'd be fine. Although, well, yeah, it's fine. So a couple of questions have come in, and feel free to, if you have more questions, to add them to the chat. But I can tell you that a couple of questions came in about the research methods. And there were two that kind of built on each other. One said, my question for the research is whether or not the comparison of children from nature preschool or not are from the same area and similar demographic. And then someone built on that, wondering as well about the comparison groups and how they were recruited, and were they offered any benefits or motivations for participating.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the comparison groups were, yes, from the same geographic area within, the Duluth area. And we purposely invited preschools that would be considered high quality, that they were well established, had a teacher that was there for, that was a well-established teacher that had a recognition of a play-based, somewhat holistic approach. Not a perfect match necessarily, but we wanted to compare it against what would be considered quality preschool. And so similar in terms of makeup of children. And so, across the nature preschools, as well as across these two preschools, I would say at least a middle, but more likely middle to upper level socioeconomic background, and not that diverse, which again sort of matches our area. And so that clearly is a weakness in terms of the generalizability. These are our pilot exploratory studies, and we recognize definitely the need to move this into other research settings where we do have more of a diverse set of participants economically and racially and ethnically. And then, larger sample sizes would be important as well. But so we did have the comparison group, and, I was kind of thinking about it as a baseline group, like what would we expect under a good preschool experience? And so it would be, the perhaps added benefit of the nature preschool element in the mix. Did I catch both of the questions there? I already forgot. Did I get them both?
Yes, I think so. And somebody, just as you were talking, was asking if you could clarify about how many schools and students participated.
Yeah. So we had, and so across the line of research studies, it's kind of varied just a little bit. We had 4 core nature preschools and then 2 baseline preschools. It was a little bit more difficult, as you could gather, to get participating non-nature preschools when we're trying to, have a hypothesis that's the role of nature play. And then I think I forgot to mention that we did, across the studies, offer teachers incentive of several $100s. Sometimes it was more or less depending on the grant, maybe 200, maybe 400, depending on the year, that they could use to support classroom materials or resources. And then the total number sample size, again, varied, in the neighborhood of like maybe 150, 120, just depending on or maybe more. I guess I can't remember exactly right now. That detail is not fresh in my mind, but I quickly saw a chat pop up that I think is relevant here and asked about Head Starts. In our most recent preschool study last year, where we were looking at physical activity, and we are measuring step-based physical movement with children wearing DigiWalkers, which are like a validated Fitbit for, exercise science studies with children. We had 2 Head Starts participating in that, one nature and one non-nature. And then we also were implementing the Peabody measure of movement, and I'm not saying that title completely right, but it's gross motor and fine motor. It was a very labor-intensive instrument. It takes about an hour per child, and I'm not exactly what I was thinking at the time. I thought we should go this route, and the sad thing is we have our pre-test data, and then the virus hit, and so through the university we were not able to be collecting data in person, so we had hundreds of hours of pre-test data invested that we don't have the post-test for. We do have the complete set of physical activity data, so we haven't analyzed that yet, but that did have Head Start participation. We have a growing partnership with our Head Starts locally and our Head Start sites locally, and so in the future we'll be able to work with them more. We just hope for days where we're a little bit back to normal for regular research, research. So,
I think we're all waiting for that day.
yeah.
Okay, a question that came in a little while ago, maybe you didn't catch, was from Elisa. She said it was very interesting that studies on resilience show behaviors transferring between contexts, like the preschool and home, that shift. She said this seems like a really important part of resilience. Is it captured and reported in the brief? And are there other studies that show this difference in how skills or impacts differ given the context the child is in?
So I'm trying to remember in the briefs. Yes, it is captured in the brief. And so I agree, the ability to transfer these constructs or these outcomes, these skills, dispositions outside of the nature preschool environment, I think is critical. And even I would argue, absolutely for resilience, can they display initiative? Can they draw from attachments? Because unfortunately they're not going to be at their nature preschool the rest of their lives, and so that transferability is really important. There are some instruments that are better designed to check for that transferability, but a lot of times our research methods don't have that capability, and unless multiple measures or methods are used, I would say there's not been a lot of work on children's resilience in nature. Louise Chawla has done some. I just saw a recent article come through that was out of a Scottish set of nature preschools. And I can't remember offhand if those looked at the transferability. I feel like Louise Chawla's was observations while children were in a playscape. So I'm thinking that maybe didn't study transferability. But there's been a really wonderful body of research coming out of a researcher at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities campus. Ann Maston has just wonderful work, and she describes resilience as this ordinary magic that we used to think it was like kind of like the superhero kids that in the 60s were resilient and were superheroes because they could, they grew up in these terrible circumstances and made it. But what she has been learning over her decades of involvement in studying resilience is that it isn't a superhero trait, it's ordinary magic. And there's a lot of things that can be done to support children in resilience. And probably one of the strongest influences is having at least one caring adult, a strong attachment with at least one person. And again, that just really speaks to all of you as practitioners and the relationships that you have with your children, because that nature side, I think, I think is safe to say is really doing important things towards strengthening those internal reserves that will hopefully move forward with children.
I was just thinking about something that I was noting as you were talking, and this idea of transferability reminded me of it a little bit, although it's a little different. But I was thinking about when you had your two circles and, you're thinking about child development and you're thinking about sort of the sustainability, kind of environmental literacy realm, and we're in this intersection. And I noticed that when you talk about the child development piece, we can be really specific. Like there were lots of bullet points there around these parts of child development and some of the specific kind of constructs and skills that are associated with these different realms. But when we talk about the other side, it's more vague. there, you know, we don't divide it up in the same way. We don't talk about the specific skills. And I was thinking as you were talking, I was noticing that you were mentioning that, you know, a lot of the skills that we can define in the child development realm, you mentioned, are also important in the other. So that, you know, there's a transferability sort of that way also. So I don't know, I was just curious if you had any thoughts about sort of whether we can define more clearly what are those skills and dispositions that go with that other sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's maybe not a really great visualization for the reason that you said, because it's almost like, maybe it's making it sound like they're too different. But I think what I was trying to show is that, you know, there's times where I, you know, have it suggested, like, could you study early literacy? Well, yes, you could study that, but that isn't personally my interest. Like, I think children will learn to read in due time, and there's absolutely a place for literacy. But I think it's more than that. And I think there's other people studying that, like where I'm interested in, again, is it the well-being, well-becoming? Is it really critical to this flourishing in a holistic way? And I think there is, you know, so many of those traits that I was listing as being like child development are really also very relevant to sustainability. Like empathy is a great example there. You know, I think of, you know, especially in all the recent events, do we have a citizenry that can show empathy, you know, that has empathy toward each or with each other? I should say it's not toward, it's with. And those are so key in social justice scenarios, and that's clearly a part of a more sustainable future. And so I think there are constructs that really aren't one or the other. But then, like I noticed in once in a while, I see the chat pop up, and I think some people are right on to suggesting things like affinity toward nature or connectedness to nature. There are early scientific thinking things, constructs related to science, science learning, things like, you know, observation skills, some of the traditional science process skills. So I think there's a lot of ways to kind of start listing some of those constructs. I think of the work that Luis Challa and Tom Beery, and there was a third person that moved some of the connected to nature, measuring connectedness to nature work that Martha Monroe at Florida was leading up. Pisces Foundation, I think, supported that. And then there was a subgroup that really latched on to the early childhood, and they did a lot of work on how do we capture that and what does that look like within early childhood. And some of their constructs that emerged out of that, I think, are really relevant and developmentally appropriate for early childhood, that are not just connection to nature, but really sustainability related. I recognize that if this is supposed to be a discussion, I know that I've seen other of you on the names that I know a lot about this. So is that okay if anyone jumps in, Christy, or?
Absolutely.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think I saw Patty Bailey. I know she's very versed and knowledgeable. Patty, do you have anything to add?
You did see Patty Bailey, but she actually sent me a private message that she had to hop off, and she said, I'm so interested in this.
Okay, sorry.
She sent me the recording, so I know that she had to hop off. And
sure. And there's others of you, like I said, I can't always see the whole names, but I know there's many of you that do work in this area, so feel free, anyone, to weigh in or add in.
Absolutely.
Can I actually ask for clarification? So you just mentioned a group from Florida that had measures of nature connectedness that are specific for early childhood. Who is that? What are those measures?
Yeah, so they, NAAE, and Christy, you can chime in here too, but I think they just published and made available through NAAE the complete project result, and it's a book, a PDF, a really great resource guide that's measuring connectedness to nature broadly. And then there was a subset that worked on a early childhood set of tools. We worked on reviewing a whole host of things and choosing, and anyways, so Luis Challa and Tom Beery, there was a third person kind of took the lead on that younger child piece. And they just published, and maybe that's something we can help put in the chat or send out afterwards. They published kind of a summary of their work in the International Journal for Early Childhood Education. But I also think that piece is represented in the broader resource that's available through NAAE's resources. Christy, do you want to weigh in on that?
I was just searching to try to find the link to put in. Did you find
It's in
it?
there. I put it in there. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Okay, great.
thank you.
Great, thank you.
Emily. Thank you, Emily. Yes, and that's a great, it lists a number of tools that are appropriate for use in young children. And that's, for example, one of the tools that we drew from in that suite of tools is a measure of affinity toward nature, which is part of the empathy study that we have underway this year at the zoo, at the Lake Superior Zoo School. And it's a set of items where you have puppets, like two identical puppets, and then you say, like, this little girl likes to look for sticks outside and plays with sticks or something. That's not right, but kind of that idea. And then you have the other puppet, like, this little girl really doesn't like to pick up sticks when she's outside and play with them. And again, that's not quite the item, but that's the gist of it. And then the preschool is invited to say which little girl they're more like or which puppet they're more like. And that's been an instrument that I've used in the past that works really well, and it produces a numerical measure of affinity toward nature. So anyways, that resource has that tool described, but other options to measure connectedness within young children.
Thank you.
And I just want to make just a quick note about the time. So our forums, we usually allot an hour and a half, and the first hour or so is for the full group, and then the second, the last half hour is small group. As I mentioned, we were going to not do small groups because of the topic just didn't seem like a fit. So we can continue this conversation. If there are more questions, if you're able to stay for the full 90 minutes, that's fine. But if not, if you have an hour, you know, obviously you can just hop off, and we will make the recording available, and we'll share the resources out. And we'll try to share, capture the chat resources that have been shared too, so that we can make sure that everybody gets access to that. So if you need to go, feel free, but if you're interested in continuing the conversation, just wanted to put that out there for everybody.
Yeah, and I'd also invite, like I said, I keep seeing names of you that are, I mean, there's so many names that I don't know, but many that I do, they're just really doing wonderful work with research and practice and such. And so I feel like, yeah, please share, because I think there's a lot of wisdom and wonderful work represented across all of you. And I have one little piece, but much bigger stuff going on. So if anyone wants to share the work that they're doing, or feel free to do that too.
I was just going to mention, you mentioned Patty Bailey. Unfortunately, she had to hop off, but when you were talking about the measures for nature connection, I was also thinking about the work that she has done around defining sort of the natureness of a school. And I wondered if you had used her tool or some other method to distinguish between what qualifies as a nature preschool and what is a non-nature preschool. Did you have a certain sort of threshold of natureness to distinguish a nature preschool?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's been one of the challenges in this research line, was kind of trying to define and then also recognize differences. And so we did draw from Patty's work. She has that rubric that's in, is it David Sobel's book? She has it published in a chapter in somebody's book, but it also available probably other places. We use that. I found other continuums of like natureness in terms of space that are used in like studying nature health benefits. And so we used Patty's, we used one that David Sobel had worked on. I had worked on one, you know, so we kind of in the end merged a few. And then part of our project last year with Prior Lake was to kind of finalize our rubric for, is it nature, is it blended, or is it non-nature? I'm not sure we still have it nailed down, but it's sort of an evolving. I think we're getting more precise in the way that we can describe it, which it is. There's one other thing that I was going to say relating to that escaped me. Maybe it'll come back to me. It was something about the describe. What was the beginning part of your question, the rubric, I don't know.
Again, just distinguishing between the
Yeah.
whether it's in nature or.
Oh, yeah, okay. So the other thing I was going to say is that in a lot of these studies, what we're doing is looking at nature preschools together. But it's also been interesting to see how the nature preschools differ within nature preschools. And I think what is my hypothesis that, so far from the data is that depending on the outcome, there are going to be some even nature preschools that are more stronger, depending on specifically what's happening. So if it's resilience and that nature preschool is using a little more of this and a little bit of less of that, that might play out. So we've been seeing variations within the nature preschool cluster, as well as across nature to non-nature. So I think that suggests the complexity and the need for moving to not only what are they doing, but why, like how is this working, and and for whom. And that's where, like I said, within our suite of nature preschools, we have one that's farm animal focused, not focused, but has a lot of farm animals. There's that element of animal care that's not at all the places. We have one that's in more of a wild nature place. We have one that's, using a bit more of a, maintain. So I think all those little variations do matter, especially when we're thinking about which outcome. But I think collectively there's a strong evidence base for nature preschools in general, but not to neglect the kind of important variations across them. So, yeah.
Can I just jump in and ask if anyone knows where we could find that nature scale rubric that Patty worked on? Because a couple quick Googles didn't locate it.
Yeah,
and people are wondering.
If either Emily or Christine offhand, it's in a chapter of, I think it's David Sobel's Nature Preschool book. Is that right, Emily and Christy? So it's maybe something that if you email me, I can get that to you, and I can get you a couple other rubrics if you're looking at trying to create a rubric. I worked on one that I used within the AZA Zoo and Aquarium context. We did a study on nature play and engaging families. And as part of that, the number of participating programs that we were trying to evaluate, 50 some nature play area to nature programming with children to preschool, and so part of that we created a rubric to start looking at variations across sites. And so we've got a couple different versions as well as some published ones that I'd be happy to share. So if you just want to email me, I'd send you links to those if that's helpful.
And I think when we share out, we'll share out the recording and resources, and we can add it. We'll track it down exactly where was that published in the book. I remember seeing it in an earlier stage, so we'll find the best link for that too when we share out the results of the form. I see there was a question earlier a while back about the empathy study, and Jen asked, what instruments do you plan to use in that study?
Yes, and if Leah's still on the call, she can weigh in as well because she was the one that was administering the instruments. I would have to pull up to actually look at the name of what we drew from. There's some work being done in AZA to create a suite of instruments to measure empathy. And the zoo and aquarium world has really done some wonderful work in the direction of empathy with animals, in particular with wildlife, but I think there's a lot of possibility for the relationship with animals and also with humans. And as we looked at those, none of them were quite designed for young children and weren't quite a fit. And so we ended up pulling from an instrument that I feel like was from the 90s. It was a little bit obscure in the literature. And there was a zoo that was using an instrument that I wondered if was kind of modeled after that as well. But it basically has different pictures and then scenarios. And so there's a set with people, but then there's a set with animals. And Leah, are you still on the call? Do you want to describe it since you just administered them recently? Or she may have had to leave, I'm not sure.
I'm not seeing her name on the list.
She maybe had to go too. Yeah, I'm guessing she had to lunch hour and had to get back. But in essence, you would say like, maybe there was a picture of a dog or something like that. And it said, you show it to the picture, and then it would say, or you show the child the picture, and it would say, this dog was playing with a stick, and then another dog came and just pulled that stick right away from it and ran off, and now this dog has no stick. How do you think the dog feels? And then like, how do you feel? And then what would you do? It was kind of like a set of 3 questions. There's 3 dimensions within empathy. And so there's like a question for each dimension. This is a little bit out of my brain. I worked on it a lot over the summer and then handed it off to Leah to administer, and I'm kind of forgetting some of the details. But in essence, there were a set of pictures that corresponded with 4 or 5 major kind of emotion that are common in young children, or that would be somewhat universal in children. And then there was a set of pictures that had a similar line of questioning with children. I feel like I'm not articulating this very well at all, but I'd be happy to share what we are using. We'll know better how they work after this school year, but I'd be happy to show you what we worked on and give you the citation. We also did a lit review on empathy for this project. And so I'd be happy to share that too, or I could add that. I'll ask Leah just to make sure I can share that, but I'd be happy to relay those out in whatever way works, or directly to someone that would want those.
I have a question. Do you just, like with empathy, because all this, these scenes of empathy are flooding my brain right now of my outdoor kids, but do you just observe and document? Like, do you just observe a class and document what you're seeing, like random acts of empathy? Do you do that?
I think, you know, Jan, I think that really speaks well to what Christy was talking about. You know, anybody who works in these programs have all these things that they could share, like of these, you know, and that's what I said when my students come back. They're like, oh my gosh, these kids are very compassionate, very empathic. And so there would be ways for you as a practitioner or for an outside researcher to, through observation, document what they're seeing. And that's, for example, Louise Chawla tends to do that kind of work. And that reminds me of her work with resilience and watching children play in playscapes. So there is a type of research that is observational and kind of case study, or as a practitioner, action research where you're documenting. And I think, you know, if that's meaningful to your program, documenting those, and there could be ways of summarizing or further kind of, you know, thematically sharing back the kinds of things that you're seeing. And those can be very powerful forms of evidence too.
Okay.
I tend to do the measured instruments. I've got a quantitative brain and I measure things, but it's great to have people that are doing the qualitative and really meaningful, rich, deep observation kinds of over time. Those are really great research methods too.
Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, I was just thinking the other day, it would be fun to work on a project with anyone, with all of you, where we had like a photo-based, because, you know, as I was working again to put something together for today, I was just like, yeah, the numbers, the data is compelling, and there are stakeholder groups that need like these, what's the p-value or what's the significance of these different things. But I think there is something so compelling in the photos. Like I was going to some of the Facebook pages of the cooperating sites, and I lost hours just like being engrossed in these beautiful, where you see on their faces, it's so compelling. And I was thinking there could be just this most beautiful photo collection, a book of photos with even, you know, little bits of what kids are saying. But boy, that tells the story in my mind.
That's true. Yeah, I'm picturing, we have a dirty dirt hill, which is a favorite of the kids out of everything. And I'm picturing the kids, they have miniature rakes and they pull their friend up the hill. Just, it's automatic. There was a boy on a big log and he was stuck in prickers. And this other girl just, nobody told her to do this. Other 4-year-old just crawled and got him out. You know, it's like, I didn't tell them to go help. I just stood and watched. But those examples are, they just blow me away. So
it does. And that's like, it gets me so inspired and so excited about this year's study, because I just think, what is it that's having the kids do that, you know, like
I know.
and that they would, and then it's like, gosh, those kids will be then out in our communities, perceptive to notice and to offer a hand and to be kind and to show compassion and show empathy. I'm just like, boy, that work that's happening has really, you know, that comes back to the tagline for NAAE, the world education we need, the world we want. That's the world I want to live in. You know, I want to be living where all those little preschoolers are.
I know.
In among us. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your work, Jan, too.
Thanks.
Great examples. Does anyone else? Oh, sure.
It's
Go
Becky
ahead.
from Duluth. How are you?
Great. I'm sorry, I missed. What was your name?
It's Becky. I'm in disguise.
Oh, Becky.
In my
Yes. Okay. I can't see all the. My screen is shows me.
I just wanted to say that I'm one of the programs Julie referenced, Head Start in Duluth with the school district, and I come at this with an equity lens. The programs we have in Duluth, the nature-based programs, are fabulous. They're fantastic, but they do cut out some of our families because of tuition or lack of transportation, or, you know, the list is there. So we're really excited to do this work with Julie and you know, have concrete evidence that even kids who are in public programs really would benefit from this versus kind of a deficit-based model, which is usually what we get.
Yeah, and I appreciate so much, Becky, you chiming in, and you know, Becky and her colleagues are doing really wonderful work in across the Head Start sites, which, you know, are reaching a much more diverse audience, as she said. What Becky and I have been talking about for going forward is the possible route of integrating nature-based pedagogies into trauma-informed care practices, and thinking about that framework, and then thinking about, instead of us creating the framework, how could that be created or developed through the teachers, like, rather than, it's not us creating the framework, like helping facilitating the creation of it by the teachers, the practitioners who are right there. And there's a phrasing for that again is escaping me. My mind is so scattered, I'm sorry. But I'm really excited about the possibility of working and blending that. And, you know, as Becky mentioned in an earlier conversation, you know, the children that are really impacted not only by the pandemic, but also the racial tensions that we are feeling, you know, ever since the events this summer. We're not that far from some of that. And so, you know, these children are very much in the midst of trauma of varying scopes and depths. And so, again, I'm just so thankful that the practitioners of this world are here to, you know, be there and provide the relationships, the safe environments and such. So again, a thank you to all of you who do that work with children right now. Do others of you want to share the work that you're doing to document and, you know, share the good work you're doing with stakeholders? Are there research needs that you want to relay back? Are there others of you who have other things to say? I feel like I've talked way too much, and so
Well, if there aren't more questions or anyone willing to share, I think we could probably wrap up, but I would just really emphasize that last point as my pitch to you is thinking about this trauma-informed practice. And it's just such an urgent need right now. And I do feel like it's a little bit of a research gap in thinking about what's nature's role in that piece. I mean, there are pieces that we know, but I think more evidence there and just a deeper understanding of what's effective would help us all so much, and it's something that we're going to be needing for a while, unfortunately. So that's my hope looking forward, is that we can build that out more. But thank you so much for sharing all of this and staying so long to answer all these questions. And we'll do our very best to share all of the resources that we've heard about today, and all the briefs, of course, that Julie shared. There was a link, but we can also share the actual PDFs, which will make it easier for everybody to use them, I think. And,
yeah. And I just want to say one quick thank you for the work that Natural Start Alliance is doing to have, like I said at the beginning, to build momentum, to share spotlights of programs, to share resources, to really make this a movement, and just to connect us all. I just feel like we so badly need connections with each other and support. And so this service, I don't know if that's the right word, that you are providing is really very important and meaningful. And thank you for that.
It's our deep pleasure, and we get as much out of it as well. So thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. We will follow up with all of the details, and big thank you to you, Julie.
All right, take care.
All of your work and taking your time.
Sure. Thank you. Goodbye.
Hi, everybody.